Experience life in Tudor England, 24 hours in a medieval English town. What if everything you thought you knew about medieval life was incomplete? What if the greatest challenges of that era weren't what history books emphasize? What if survival depended less on grand battles and more on the precise choreography of daily routine? What if the smell of a Tudor morning could tell you more about social order than any royal decree? What if the distance between comfort and catastrophe was measured not in miles, but in the thickness of a wall? These aren't abstract questions. They're invitations to step through time, to feel the weight of wet wool against your skin, to hear the specific sound of wooden clogs on cobblestone before dawn, to understand that history isn't just what happened, but how it felt to live inside each passing hour. By the end of this journey, you'll grasp something most people miss: that the architecture of survival in Tudor England was built not from stone alone, but from 1,000 invisible agreements about when to wake, where to stand, and what never to say aloud. The darkness before dawn in a Tudor town carries a specific density you can almost touch. It's 4 a.m, and you're standing in a narrow street where the upper floors of timber-framed houses lean so close together they nearly kiss overhead, creating a tunnel of shadow that daylight will barely penetrate even at noon. The air temperature hovers just above freezing, but it's the dampness that matters. A wet cold that finds every gap in your clothing and settles into your bones like an unwelcome guest planning a long stay. Your breath creates small clouds that hang suspended for a moment before dissolving into the general moisture that seems to coat everything in this town, from the uneven cobblestones beneath your feet to the rough plaster walls flanking the street. The smell arrives in layers. First, the sharp tang of wood smoke from banked fires being coaxed back to life inside the houses. Then the earthier scent of animals stirring in ground floor workshops and stables, and underneath it all, the persistent presence of human waste from chamber pots emptied into the central gutter, mixing with rainwater and rotting vegetable matter into a slurry that gleams faintly in the pre-dawn gloom. You hear the town waking before you see it. A rooster's crow echoes from somewhere behind the baker's shop, followed by the scrape of a wooden shutter being pushed open, the creak of leather hinges protesting the movement. Someone coughs, a wet, rattling sound that carries in the stillness. Then comes the first purposeful footsteps, the distinctive clatter of wooden pattens, those elevated overshoes that keep feet above the muck, their rhythm announcing that the working day has begun, whether anyone feels ready or not. Inside the baker's dwelling, the first fire of the day has already been burning for half an hour. The oven, a massive dome of brick and clay that occupies nearly a quarter of the workshop space, radiates heat that transforms the room into something completely different from the frozen street outside. The temperature differential is so extreme that condensation forms on the small glass windows, running down in continuous streams that pool on the wooden sills. The baker's apprentice, a boy of perhaps 13 whose name you'll never learn but whose movements reveal years of practiced efficiency, tends the fire with a long iron poker, adjusting the placement of logs to achieve the specific heat distribution required for different types of bread. The wood itself matters: seasoned oak for sustained high heat, smaller pieces of ash for quick temperature adjustments. The apprentice doesn't measure temperature with instruments because such instruments don't exist for common tradesmen. Instead, he reads the oven by color, by the way flames move, by how quickly a handful of flour thrown onto the oven floor browns. This knowledge isn't written anywhere. It lives in his hands, his judgment, his ability to sense when the brick has absorbed enough heat to bake for the next 4 hours without additional fuel. The bread production follows a strict hierarchy. First, the finest white manchet loaves for wealthy households, requiring the most expensive wheat flour, sifted multiple times to remove any trace of bran. These bake at the highest temperature, achieving a golden crust and tender interior that announces status as clearly as any coat of arms. Next come the standard wheaten loaves for merchant families, then the mixed grain breads for craftsmen, and finally, as the oven temperature gradually decreases, the heavy rye and barley loaves that will feed laborers and servants. This sequence isn't just efficient, it's a physical manifestation of social order, baked into the very structure of the working day. The street outside transforms as dawn approaches. You notice how carefully people navigate the space, their movements revealing an intricate understanding of invisible boundaries. A servant carrying a covered basket of fresh bread moves along the right side of the street, close to the buildings, while a farmer driving 2 pigs toward the butcher's yard takes the center path, and a well-dressed merchant's wife, her shoes barely touching the ground thanks to wooden pattens elevated a good 4 inches, claims the driest route near the left wall. These aren't random choices. Each person occupies the position their social status permits, a choreography so deeply ingrained that violation would be immediately noticed and remarked upon. The quality of clothing tells you who can afford wool versus linen, who has access to dyes versus natural fabric colors, who wears patched and mended garments versus relatively new ones. But it's the small details that reveal the most. The servant's rough hands, reddened and cracked from constant exposure to cold water and harsh soap. The merchant's wife's pale skin, protected from sun and weather. The farmer's rolling gait, shaped by years of walking behind a plow. The space between these people isn't just physical distance. It's a gap maintained by law, custom, and the collective agreement that stability requires everyone to remain in their designated position within the social structure. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel, because what you're about to discover isn't available in conventional history textbooks. This isn't simplified medieval trivia. This is the lived reality that determined whether families thrived or barely survived, and understanding these patterns changes everything about how we view our own daily routines and the systems we take for granted. By 7 in the morning, the town square has become the central nervous system of Tudor life. The market isn't just a place to exchange goods, it's where information flows, where reputations are built or destroyed, where the invisible rules governing community survival are enforced through collective attention. You stand near the central well, watching as vendors arrange their goods on wooden trestle tables or directly on the ground atop canvas sheets. The fish seller positions her display on the north side of the square, where morning shadow will keep her wares cool for a few extra hours. She arranges the fish by quality. Fresh catches from this morning's delivery at the front. Yesterday's fish toward the back. Their slightly duller eyes and stronger smell relegated to customers with less money or fewer options. The vegetable sellers cluster together, their root crops, cabbages, and early spring greens creating a patchwork of earth tones interrupted by the occasional bright bundle of herbs. Each seller calls out their wares, but there's an art to the performance. Too loud and you seem desperate, too quiet and potential customers never notice you exist. The successful vendors maintain a steady patter, adjusting volume and content based on who approaches, offering different information to different customers. A wealthy household's cook receives news about the freshest items and advance notice of tomorrow's deliveries. A servant buying on behalf of a modest family learns which items are approaching the end of their viable sale period and might be negotiated down in price. The real education happens in watching how transactions occur. Currency exists, but barter remains common, especially among people of similar social standing. The baker's wife trades a dozen day-old rolls for a bunch of carrots and 3 onions, a transaction that requires no coin but demands precise knowledge of relative value. The butcher settles an outstanding debt with the candle maker through an exchange of tallow, the rendered animal fat essential for producing the cheapest candles that most households depend upon. These exchanges aren't simple trades. They're part of a complex web of mutual obligation that binds the community together and provides a backup system when cash becomes scarce. Trust is the actual currency here, maintained through face-to-face interaction and the knowledge that reputation, once damaged, may never recover in a town where everyone knows everyone else's business. You notice how people stand when negotiating. Bodies angled slightly away, creating the possibility of polite disengagement if terms can't be agreed upon. Hands visible to demonstrate honest intent. The space between buyer and seller contracts and expands based on the delicacy of the negotiation, a physical conversation happening simultaneously with the verbal one. The town's water supply reveals another layer of engineered survival. The central well serves multiple functions beyond providing drinking water. It's a gathering point where information spreads faster than any official announcement, where young women encounter each other under the socially acceptable pretense of fetching water, where the quality of your water bucket announces your household's economic status. The well itself is a marvel of collective investment. Stone-lined to prevent collapse, with a wooden frame and rope mechanism that requires regular maintenance funded through small contributions from every household that uses it. The water drawn from this well isn't equally distributed. Wealthy families send servants to fetch water multiple times daily, using it for drinking, cooking, washing, and even bathing in rare instances. Poorer families use water more strategically, drinking it fresh but reusing washing water for multiple purposes before finally discarding it into the street. The difference isn't just about comfort, it's about health, about how frequently you can wash your body and your clothing, about whether you have enough water to properly cook beans and grains, or must make do with simpler preparations that require less fuel and less liquid. The well water tastes of minerals and stone, cold enough to make your teeth ache, carrying a slight metallic tang that becomes completely normal after a few days of drinking it. Some households believe the well water has properties that prevent illness, while others prefer ale or weak beer, considering the alcohol safer than unpredictable water sources. Your attention shifts to the town bakery entrance, where a line has formed despite the early hour. The people waiting aren't merely buying bread, they're having it baked. Many households lack their own ovens, making bread dough at home but bringing it to the communal bakehouse for baking. Each family's dough carries a distinctive mark, a pattern pressed into the surface that will survive the baking process and allow identification when dozens of loaves emerge from the oven simultaneously. The system works because everyone participates honestly, because the baker's reputation depends on never mixing up loaves, and because the community would collectively punish any baker who violated this trust. The cost of using the communal oven is regulated by town authorities, preventing price gouging while ensuring the baker earns enough to maintain the equipment. This balance between private enterprise and community regulation appears throughout Tudor town life, a constant negotiation between individual profit and collective survival. The bread emerging from the oven right now will be consumed within 2 days at most. Without preservatives or refrigeration, food exists in a state of continuous transformation from fresh to questionable to definitely spoiled, requiring daily shopping and constant attention to signs of decay. Write a comment right now, sharing your immediate reaction to learning how Tudor communities balanced individual needs with collective survival, because this system had profound implications that most people never consider when thinking about medieval life. As midday approaches, the town's rhythm intensifies. You move through the marketplace toward the craftsman's district, where specialized workshops line narrow streets organized by trade. The blacksmith's forge dominates one corner, its heat and noise creating a sphere of influence that extends far beyond the actual building. The sound of hammer on anvil provides a steady metallic pulse that becomes the background rhythm for surrounding activities. You step inside the workshop, and the temperature change is immediate and overwhelming. The forge fire burns white hot at the center of the space, fed by a young apprentice working leather bellows in a regular, practiced motion that maintains consistent heat. The smith himself, a man whose forearms show burns in various stages of healing, works a piece of iron that glows orange-red, shaping it through repeated cycles of heating and hammering. Each strike of the hammer isn't random. The smith hits specific spots with varying force, reading the metal's response, adjusting technique based on how the iron moves under impact. This knowledge can't be learned from books, because books on metallurgy don't exist for common tradesmen. The smith learned his craft through years of observation and practice, developing an intimate understanding of how different types of metal behave at different temperatures, when to quench in water versus oil, how to judge if a piece has been overworked and is about to fracture. The items produced here range from horseshoes and nails to hinges and cooking implements, each requiring different skills and commanding different prices. A simple nail might seem insignificant, but consider the labor involved. Iron must be heated, drawn out into wire, cut to length, and shaped with a head, all by hand. A skilled smith can produce a few hundred nails in a day, but that's the extent of his output, which is why nails are valuable enough that people salvage them from demolished buildings rather than discard them with the timber. The economic calculation is constant. How much time does this take? What can I charge? Will people pay that price? Or should I focus on different products? The smith's decisions ripple outward, affecting carpenters who need nails, householders who need repairs, builders working on new construction. Everything connects to everything else in ways that become visible once you start tracking the flow of materials and labor through the town's economy. Adjacent to the blacksmith, a carpenter's workshop produces a different kind of transformation. Here, the smell shifts from hot metal and coal smoke to fresh-cut wood and hide glue. The carpenter works oak, the preferred timber for furniture and structural elements that need to last generations. The wood arrives as rough-cut planks that must be further shaped using hand tools, saws, planes, chisels, all maintained with obsessive care because replacement is expensive and time-consuming. The carpenter's work requires different knowledge than the smith's, but equally sophisticated. Understanding how different woods split, where knots will cause weakness, how to join pieces so they hold together without metal fasteners, which tools work best for which operations. A simple joint, like a mortise and tenon that connects two pieces of timber, represents accumulated knowledge about wood grain, shrinkage, seasonal expansion and contraction, and how to cut pieces so they fit together with enough friction to hold without being so tight that they crack when humidity changes. The carpenter shapes time itself, creating objects meant to outlive their maker, betting that his skill today will be appreciated by people decades hence who will use a table, a door, a roof beam, without knowing or caring who made it. If this detailed look at Tudor craftsmanship resonates with you, show your support by clicking that like button, because understanding these lost skills helps us appreciate the invisible complexity built into every object we take for granted today. The afternoon brings you to the edge of town, where agriculture and urban life blur together. Most Tudor towns aren't separate from the countryside. They're embedded in it, with fields often visible from central streets and many town residents maintaining gardens or small livestock. You walk through a common field where several families work strips of land in a system so old nobody remembers its origin. Each family owns the right to farm specific strips, but the larger field operates collectively. Decisions about planting schedules, crop rotation, and use of common grazing land are made by community agreement. The current crop is winter wheat, planted last autumn and now showing green shoots that will mature by late summer. The field isn't divided by fences. Instead, narrow grass margins separate one family's strip from the next, boundaries maintained by custom and mutual observation rather than physical barriers. This system requires intense cooperation and creates constant opportunities for conflict. What if one family's weeds spread to neighboring strips? What if someone grazes their animals too long on the common land? What if someone refuses to participate in communal tasks like maintaining drainage ditches? The solutions to these problems aren't written in law books accessible to common farmers. They're embedded in local custom, enforced through social pressure, and adjudicated by informal councils of respected elders who hear disputes and render judgments that carry weight because the community recognizes their authority. The actual work of farming proceeds through the afternoon. A man guides a wooden plow pulled by two oxen, cutting furrows in soil that's been worked this way for centuries. The plow itself is a sophisticated tool, its curved blade designed to turn soil rather than just cut it. Its handles angled to give the farmer leverage without requiring excessive strength. Walking behind that plow for hours, fighting to keep it straight while managing the oxen, represents labor so physically demanding that farmers age faster than craftsmen, their bodies wearing out from the relentless grind of agricultural work. The soil here is heavy clay, difficult to work but fertile once properly managed. Farmers add manure from their animals, ashes from household fires, anything organic that might improve soil structure and add nutrients. The knowledge of what works comes from observation and experimentation passed down through generations, a science without the name but no less sophisticated for lacking formal terminology. Nearby, women and children work a kitchen garden producing vegetables for household consumption. The garden's layout isn't random. Taller plants positioned to provide shade for heat-sensitive crops, herbs planted near the house for easy access, root vegetables in the plot with the best drainage. This represents accumulated botanical knowledge. What grows well together, what depletes soil versus what enriches it, when to plant based on weather patterns and moon phases. The women working here understand plant biology in practical terms that would surprise modern botanists, able to predict which seeds will germinate based on appearance and feel, knowing that some crops benefit from being planted when the moon is waxing, while others do better in the waning phase. Whether lunar planting actually works is less important than the fact that it organizes activity, provides a framework for decision-making, and creates predictability in an uncertain world. The children help with weeding and harvesting, learning skills they'll use throughout their lives, absorbing knowledge through participation rather than formal instruction. Take a moment to share this video with someone who would appreciate learning about the agricultural genius built into Tudor farming systems, because these techniques sustained populations for centuries and their principles remain relevant to sustainable agriculture today. As evening approaches, you return to the town center, where the character of the streets transforms. The marketplace, so vibrant and crowded at midday, now empties as vendors pack unsold goods and disassemble their displays. The wooden trestle tables fold down, canvas sheets are shaken out and rolled up, and within an hour, the square returns to an open space revealing the accumulated debris of the day's commerce. Vegetable trimmings, spilled grain, animal droppings, muddy water pooling in low spots. A few late shoppers hurry through, hoping to negotiate bargain prices on items vendors don't want to carry home, but most food sellers would rather take goods back than sell at a loss, betting they can find buyers tomorrow if properly stored overnight. The fish seller faces a different calculation. Fish won't keep another day, so she must either sell cheap or feed her remaining stock to pigs, converting what could have been cash into future pork. These decisions happen constantly, a mental arithmetic of value and risk that determines whether a vendor ends the day with profit or loss. The shift from public activity to private household life happens gradually. Shutters close, doors are barred from inside, and the streets empty as people retreat into domestic spaces. You follow a craftsman's family into their home, a two-story timber-framed building where the ground floor serves as workshop and shop, while the upper floor contains living quarters. The division between work and home life doesn't exist in the modern sense. The spaces flow together, with the boundary being more about time than location. Once the shop closes for the night, the ground floor transforms from commercial to domestic space. The workbench gets cleared, tools are put away, and the family gathers around a table for their main meal of the day. The food is simple but substantial, a thick pottage of grains and vegetables that's been simmering all day in a pot suspended over the fire, dark bread, a small portion of cheese, and weak ale. The pottage tastes earthy and filling, seasoned with herbs from the kitchen garden and enriched with a small piece of preserved pork that adds richness to the broth. The bread is coarse, containing bran and bits of grain that make chewing a deliberate activity, nothing like the soft, uniform bread of later centuries. The cheese is hard and strong-flavored, designed to keep for months rather than be consumed fresh. The family eats together, but the portions aren't equal. The father, as the primary wage earner, receives the largest serving. The mother takes less, and the children receive smaller portions still, adjusted by age and size. This isn't cruelty. It's practical distribution of limited resources based on who needs the most calories to perform their work. The father must maintain strength for physically demanding labor, while the mother's work, though constant, requires less raw caloric expenditure, and the children need food for growth but can't yet contribute adult levels of labor. After the meal, the mother doesn't wash dishes in the modern sense because water is too valuable to waste on such purposes. Instead, she wipes the wooden bowls clean with bread, using the food to absorb residue, then stores the bowls on a shelf for tomorrow's use. The pot that held the pottage gets a cursory rinse, but tomorrow's meal will start with the same pot, and any residue will simply become part of the next batch. Modern hygiene standards don't apply, but the system works because the fire kills most harmful bacteria during cooking, and the continuous use of the same pot means any bacteria that do survive have already colonized the family's digestive systems, making additional exposure relatively harmless. The evening hours bring a different rhythm. With darkness falling and artificial light expensive, the family's activities contract around a single tallow candle that provides barely enough illumination to see faces across the table. The father might repair a tool by candlelight, working by feel as much as sight. The mother uses the dim light to mend clothing, her fingers knowing the fabric well enough to work without seeing every stitch clearly. The children, tired from the day's activities, huddle near the fire for warmth, possibly listening to stories or learning songs that carry cultural knowledge from one generation to the next. The house temperature drops rapidly as evening progresses. The fire provides a zone of warmth that extends perhaps 6 feet, beyond which the temperature approaches the outdoor cold. The family naturally clusters in the warm zone, their bodies adding to the collective heat, their proximity serving both practical and social functions. Conversation happens, but it's not the rapid-fire exchange of modern dialogue. Words come more slowly in the evening, shaped by fatigue and the contemplative mood that darkness brings. People speak about the day's events, upcoming work, concerns about weather or health, small observations that maintain social bonds and shared understanding. As night deepens fully, the family prepares for sleep in a process that reveals how different rest was in Tudor times. The house doesn't have separate bedrooms for each person. Privacy in the modern sense doesn't exist. Instead, the upper floor contains two sleeping areas, one for parents, one for children. The beds themselves are valuable possessions, wooden frames with rope lattices supporting mattresses stuffed with straw or wool, depending on the family's means. The bedding includes heavy woolen blankets that smell of lanolin and bodies, sheets that get washed perhaps monthly if the family can afford the labor and fuel for heating wash water. The father and mother share a bed, as do the children, body heat being an essential component of nighttime warmth in an era without central heating. Getting into bed requires removing outer layers of clothing, but not everything. People sleep in linen undergarments that provide a layer between body and bedding, reducing the frequency with which sheets must be washed. The bedroom smells of unwashed bodies, woolen blankets, straw mattresses, and the faint residual smoke that permeates everything in a house heated entirely by wood fire. Sleep comes quickly for people exhausted by physical labor, but it's not the uninterrupted 8 hours modern people expect. Night in a Tudor town carries its own sounds: dogs barking, voices from a tavern down the street, the watch calling out the hours, the creak of timber houses settling in the cold. People wake multiple times during the night, sometimes to tend a sick child, sometimes to use the chamber pot kept in the bedroom corner, sometimes simply because sleep was lighter and more fragmented before the modern expectation of unconsciousness from bedtime until morning. The night watch walks the streets, calling out the time and the weather conditions, providing a sense of security and order that helps people rest despite the darkness beyond their walls. The watch system works because the community collectively funds it, because men take turns serving, because everyone understands that security is a shared responsibility that requires active participation. Lying in bed in the deep darkness of a Tudor night, you become aware of how different the relationship with darkness was. No streetlights, no electric glow from neighboring windows, no light pollution washing out the stars. When clouds cover the moon, the darkness is absolute, a physical presence that makes movement dangerous and navigation nearly impossible. People respected this darkness, planned around it, understood that nighttime belonged to different rules than daylight hours. The boundary between day and night wasn't just about light levels, it marked a shift in social organization, in permissible activities, in the very texture of experience. As the night wears on and the house grows colder, you understand something fundamental about Tudor life. Survival wasn't a dramatic struggle against obvious threats, but rather a constant attention to small details that, collectively, determined whether a family thrived or slowly declined. The difference between having enough firewood and running short wasn't about wealth or poverty, but about planning, about collecting wood during the previous summer, about storing it properly so it stayed dry and burnable. The difference between maintaining health and succumbing to illness often came down to nutrition, to whether the family's food sources provided enough variety to prevent deficiency diseases, to whether they could afford to burn enough fuel to thoroughly cook food and heat water for washing. These weren't individual decisions, but patterns woven through every day of the year, choices made and remade until they became habits that defined the boundary between stability and crisis. If you've watched until this point, you've gained something most people never encounter: a visceral understanding of how daily life actually worked, in an era we usually view through the distorted lens of castles and kings. But the real history happened here, in the careful calibration of work and rest, in the social choreography of the marketplace, in the collective systems that allowed communities to survive despite challenges that would overwhelm isolated individuals. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel, because this approach to history, focused on material reality and lived experience, reveals patterns that remain relevant today. Leave a comment right now saying, "I watched until the end," so I can know who genuinely appreciates these deep historical explorations and wants more. Click that like button if this journey through Tudor daily life changed how you think about historical periods and the people who lived through them. Share this video with anyone who claims medieval life was simpler than modern existence, because what you've experienced here proves that survival has always required sophisticated knowledge, cooperation, and constant attention to details that separate success from failure. The Tudor town you've walked through exists now only in fragments and documents, but the principles embedded in its daily rhythms, the balance between individual initiative and collective responsibility, the recognition that small choices compound into major outcomes, these remain as relevant as ever. History isn't just what happened, it's how people made it through each day, and understanding that transforms our view of both the past and the present we're building right now.